So here with me here in this panel session, we're going to be hearing from three of the key partners, I would say, within the market who are playing significant role in what's happening within the O-RAN environment. And before we jump into the question, I'd like for each one of them to briefly introduce themselves and to talk about what they do within the business and how they are supporting us. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Lourdes. Good evening. I'm Manish with Dell Technologies. And maybe just to give you a quick big picture perspective on what Dell's doing around Open RAN and telecom broadly, we see networks going through major transformation. A lot of that transformation started in the core networks, and now it continues to move further towards the RAN and the edge. And so first and foremost, we've been bringing the right kind of compute solutions that you require on these edges and on the radio access network sites. What that means is shorter depth, extended temperature ranges, NIPS compliance, on, with the right kind of accelerators to really cater for RAN workload, but then also working on things like automation, infrastructure blocks, putting the labs in place to have an open telecom ecosystem. Some of the previous speakers talked about integration and other kind of challenges to really address that and make open easy to consume for the service providers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lourdes. Samir Vuyyuru, I have the privilege of representing what we do at AWS to every telco operator worldwide, hearing from them and just working backwards from their needs to execute on what they need. We've been on a journey that is guided by one principle, which is that there needs to be a single operating system for the whole enterprise. You cannot operate the IT department one way. You cannot operate the operational department one way. You cannot operate the network another way. The single biggest ask from our customer base is unify the operating system for the enterprise. And you're starting to see a lot of that with the CTIO function being formed, where the operational technology and the IT is starting to merge. And there is a single ubiquitous programming model that takes you from IT workloads through to network workloads. And that's the guiding vision for us, defined by our customers.
Thank you. And with that, Geoff?
Thanks, Lourdes. So my name's Geoff Hollingworth. I've been in mobile since mobile began. First 10 years as a software designer, software developer, and then more recently in the US as part of business consulting, marketing, and most recently at the moment I represent Rakuten Symphony. And Rakuten took the very brave, and it's been described as brave, but maybe it wasn't as brave, decision in 2018 to actually do a completely open, disaggregated Open RAN network. It was a choice. It was actually driven because they couldn't afford to do it the traditional way, either in investment or in time. And I think at the time people were slightly concerned it wouldn't be possible, but I think with most of these ventures, it was completely possible. Technology wasn't the problem, actually. It was more about organization, mindset, and skills.
Perfect. So with that, that's a good segue to the first part of the conversation, and I'll probably start with you, Samir. I'll continue on the theme around what AWS is doing. Cloudifying the network continues to remain a key strategic area, right, for AWS. Correct. Can you walk us through the overall strategy from the telco space? And how does, if you were to look at it, vRAN, CRAN, and O-RAN, how do all of those different sides of the RAN infrastructure play a role in the overall AWS market?
Happy to do that, Lourdes. And taking a leaf out of Lalit's thing, I'm going to defer all questions to you, if that's okay. No, in all seriousness, when in 2007, when AWS first got started, starting with IT workloads, just storage. No one believed that these workloads could run in the cloud. And over the last 16 years, there have been instances where people have said these mission-critical workloads are not for the cloud. The NASDAQ comes to mind as an example, when they said NASDAQ cannot run in the cloud. It does today, right? And so we are of the firm belief that in the fullness of time, networks will completely run in the cloud. And we're executing on that vision. Now, we started 4 or 5 years ago on this mission. We said first, let's talk about the BSS. And today, all 70% of new BSS deployments are deployed in the cloud. Everyone told us that was not possible. OSS has essentially followed the same path. Then we started working on the core. And if you look at what happened at Dish, that's a really good example. Dish built a brand new network in 14 months that covered 70% of the United States because the infrastructure already existed. And we were managing the infrastructure, upgrading it, patching it. It was a fully managed infrastructure. And so today, we've publicly announced that Docomo has qualified our core, NEC's core on AWS, for example. We publicly announced that Telefonica and Swisscom are on their way. And there's many others behind that. So we firmly believe that the core will run in the cloud in the not too distant future, and that leaves the RAN. And we're in very advanced discussions to provide fully managed infrastructure to move the DU to the cloud as well. And that's the key, the fully managed infrastructure, because that is essentially removing the CapEx burden. We are investing on behalf of the telcos. And more importantly, it provides a uniform platform for the whole enterprise, who is probably already running their IT on AWS, to also run their network on AWS. If you look at Dish, they publicly said there's less than 50 people running the network, a nationwide network. And that's where the cost savings are coming from, because it's all automated.
So that is really the transition, starting from the BSS infrastructure, going to the core, and pivoting to the RAN. And really, as you look at that, it's really looking at the network from an end-to-end perspective to ultimately really make that big pivot and really realizing ultimately the goal of the operators to pivot to the model of ORAN. Geoff, I'll pivot to you. Rakuten Symphony has had a deep focus on expanding its open RAN architecture, following on to the conversation that we just had here, and really expanding it to more networks around the world. Can you expand a little bit more on the journey and the experience that you've had with that strategy?
Yeah, certainly. So at first, maybe we start just by grounding something here, that there's certain fundamentals in the industry that are starting to change. I don't think technology is a problem at all. So I've spent my whole career meeting people saying X won't run on this for these reasons. It always does, and it always changes. So slowly but surely, there has to be an acceptance that technology is not really where we need to be spending time and talking. As an industry, we know that fundamentally we are struggling from a top-line point of view and a competitive way of doing business. So what we find is an interesting space we find ourselves in the industry. There is nobody here that doesn't say Open RAN is the future. Everyone agrees with that. But it's not really a technology discussion anymore. It's really about how do you do Open RAN operationally, economically, and from an architecture point of view. And we have to make sure that those changes actually come through. So we have deployments and activity on every continent that is happening. Where we find the most interesting engagements we have is where it starts actually on how we are approaching it differently and building it differently. To build on what Samir said about Dish, they had a very interesting statement in their speed of rollout, and we've seen exactly the same thing, by the way. He turned around, and I think it was at a show about a year ago, he said that we've rolled out this footprint, and we've only done it with 200 people. It's because we're doing it differently. So as an industry, we have to embrace doing it differently. And I would recommend that the questions aren't there, it's how fast you can start doing it differently and industrialize that process. And we think it's very important for the industry, obviously, to do that.
So really, it's a different way of thinking, really, and looking at your operational team and operational environment, right? And,
it's like moving from a mainframe to deploying PCs. It's a paradigm shift. It's moving from picking up hardware to rolling out software. So if you're a software person, I'm really excited. Finally, Telecom's turned up and said software is important. Now we have to make sure we're really good at it, because software has radically changed in terms of its capabilities over the last 5, 10, 15 years. First, we need to catch up, and then we need to start leading that. We used to lead. All the people in public cloud originally came from Telecom, because Telecom knew distributed systems. They knew queuing theory. They knew how to size systems. Now we need to start to re-engage and come back into that leadership.
Perfect. Thank you, Geoff. Manish, I'm going to pivot to you. Dell has done a lot of changes recently around the telecom space. Can you expand a little bit more on really the approach and the tactics and the solutions that Dell has made available to really help overcome some of the challenges that we're all seeing in the space in terms of ON deployment?
You sure? I think I'm just going to build on what Geoff said. Moving from mainframes to PC. And who better than Dell can talk about that? Moving from mainframes to PC and what that did to the world. I mean, when you look at the power of disaggregation, the bottom line is you drive innovation at every layer. It's not about one layer or one aspect of the solution. From the underlying silicon to the operating systems to the CAS to the workloads to the radio to the antennas, you look at Open RAN from the bottom of the tower all the way to the top of the tower, and the operations, AI, analytics, optimization, automation. When you look at it holistically, the future looks really, really bright, and the opportunity looks really amazing. Now, we need to figure out a path of how do we get to that, the part at the end of the rainbow. Now, few things here to talk about. On that front. I mean, my co-panelists talk about Dish. Dell's been working with Dish rather as part of their RAN deployments, providing the RAN infrastructure. Not only the RAN infrastructure, large part of the Dish velocity, which Dish has talked about. We've provided infrastructure automation and orchestration, not for what sits inside the data center. But when we think about from a RAN perspective, an edge perspective, it's the distributed infrastructure that is sitting out and about, and how do you automate that? How do you do life cycle management of that? So that's one of the, one of the key focus areas for us is build automation for all that compute and storage that's going to sit out and about. The second key thing I will say is, the piece around edge and the opportunity that edge starts to bring in. I think that's really, it's key that RAN in many ways can become a great enabler for the telcos to look at the art of possible and what they can do around the edges. And again, automation, et cetera, starts to become important. And then, we talked about Dish. Dish is, great reference in terms of Open RAN and how they have achieved the velocity. But we have also worked with brownfield operators and are working very closely with Vodafone as part of their Open RAN deployments. And the challenges, I would say, are different, right? I mean, because we have to recognize that when you have a brownfield network, there are different set of challenges in terms of existing infrastructure, spectrum bands, legacy radio access technologies. All of those capabilities have to be brought together to really get the network to transform. And again, as part of that, the approach that we've been taking is obviously build that ecosystem and bring the right kind of partners with the objective to, again, drive that disaggregation, accelerate the transformation, but do it in a way that it's cloud native and the cloud native principles and agility that it brings to that infrastructure and the future for the operators.
Thank you.
Can I just pick up on something Manish said, because I think it is important. It's a very different challenge moving from an existing operation to a new operation versus a greenfield. Both of them have challenges, by the way. I mean, when you start in a greenfield, you have nothing. When you start in a brownfield, you have too much of things that you maybe have picked up along the way. I think there's a key part in our experience that actually the journey doesn't start with Open RAN. The journey starts with focusing on automation and actually operational transformation. If you do Open RAN without doing that, you're going to end up having a disaggregated radio that comes in a box that is not actually beneficial. And one of the reasons why we ended up doing Open RAN was for the simple fact that once you have automated, which is really the first introduction of programming into network operations, then you want to make sure all units are programmable in a standardized way. So you can get a horizontal plane.
You're right. I mean, I find that right now, really the biggest challenge that we've seen, and Lalit mentioned that earlier, is understanding and consulting, right, with the operators and with the customer to understand when do they want to move, what are the infrastructure currently that they are actually running into, and then how do you actually move them to the next level, right? So that consultative approach is extremely important, especially in a brownfield space. Not to say that it's not important in a brand new environment as well, but it's really key for success in general. And tying it back to that, my next question is open up to all of you guys, is what do you think are some of the key innovations that will help service providers truly achieve the TCO objectives that they have around Open RAN? And what role do you see AI play in these innovations in general? So probably start with you here, Samir.
Sure. I addressed this in my keynote this morning. And let's recap this for a minute. We are very opinionated that every aspect of operations for the telco needs to be infused with AI and ML. And that goes all the way from the customer experience side, where we're investing heavily in Gen AI to remake customer experience, all the way to what's actually on the RAN itself. Because there are going to be X apps out there, there are going to be R apps out there. And there's going to be hundreds of them, we hope, that have been developed in the cloud and are going to be deployed to go help the RAN. In Barcelona, we showed one of them, which was an X app from a company called Ira. I think Ravi's here as well, where we showed a 38% reduction in power consumption just by turning on their R app. So that's just a leading example of what is possible. And the second aspect is silicon innovation. We are heavily focused on bringing our own internal silicon innovation to the RAN space. We've already launched Graviton 2 and Graviton 3 in the core space, and we fully intend to work with our own silicon in the RAN space, which we know has delivered a 40% reduction in power. And that is 4% of a country's power consumption today. And so we're really focused on those two areas. And finally, we invest on behalf of our telco customers. There is nothing to buy. It is a pay-as-you-go model.
That makes a big difference. Geoff?
Well, Samir said something at the start that I think we should just come back to, which is another one of the paradigm shifts, is that if you really want to own the destiny of this operation, you have to own the system design. So that's a shift again. And in our industry, we've tended to outsource a lot to the vendor side. It's time to balance that back in some fashion. The real change of Open RAN is not technology, it's power and control. And that delivers economic change. That's really the reality, and that's why it's so hard. Once you do that, then what, in our experience, you do three things very well. First off, you simplify and industrialize your supply chain. So you reduce the optionality where you can, and you can get incredibly efficient. The good thing about telecom is we've never really focused on efficiency. So there's areas. I mean, if you think about mobile networks to power, it's a bit like leaving your house lights on 24/7 for the whole planet. So if we can just turn them off when nobody's there, it's a huge difference. And obviously the technology now allows us now to have that kind of filtering. And then as long as you have awareness of the data and the status, then you can pull that out. So industrialize the supply chain, take things out you don't need, and automate everything as much as you can. And then you start to see transformational results. The last part, which I really would like to stress for the industry, and I was joking, 18 months ago in telecom, I was getting invited to speak about metaverse everywhere, because metaverse was the answer. Now I get invited to speak about AI everywhere, because metaverse is no longer the answer, AI is the answer. If we really want to be serious about an industry about AI, the journey starts not with AI, it starts with industrializing the data pipelines. And if we can do that well for our own industry, that's actually probably going to be the primary use case for our networks in the future. And that turns up in fidelity and that turns up in timeliness as well. So if we ever want to get to that journey, it's good to do it on ourselves first.
Any additional comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've touched on a topic that is very, very interesting and very broad. I think, let me just say this. I think the opportunity for the operators really lies in differentiating and unlocking the value of large amount of data sets that they already have. And there is a lot of hidden value sitting in there. I mean, Geoff talked about energy as an example. Just pick that as a vector and think about it. These networks are dimensioned for peak traffic. And we leave them on for peak traffic even when it's middle of the night and nobody is hardly using the network. So just look at that. And think about the OpEx savings to be had. Not only doing the right thing, but the savings that you derive out of that. And so whether you shut down different antenna streams or carriers or cells themselves without even having impact on network KPIs and more. That's one opportunity. You can you can again see the potential same thing on optimization, on fault prediction, fault detection, closed loop automation. So there are all these areas that you start to see that AI is going to unlock. A lot of this we already see in other industry verticals that are already getting done. Telcos need to go through this transformation, and I think this is where Open RAN again starts to become a critical building block, because you start to put the right kind of compute, the right kind of storage capabilities in there to capture the right kind of data sets, and then really apply the machine learning capabilities and the AI capabilities to unlock the value out of that. But that, to me, cuts across the life cycle from plan, deploy, optimize, and manage your network. So it cuts across the life cycle of the network.
A data point. We did a survey, and the telco industry generates 10 to the power of 23 bytes of data every day. every day. That's 100 zettabytes. How are you going to manage that? Let's fix that first.
I do agree with you that really looking at the data source that the operators have right now and tying it back to really the infrastructure build that really is available within the hyperscaler space, tying it back really to really the concept of leveraging the edge of the network environment, right? And also the customer prime location to see how they can make progress there will make a huge difference in terms of the deployment, going back to your comment earlier about the brownfield and the greenfield space. One thing that I do understand is that operators do have a lot of concerns about their engineers, how they're going to better support the environment that they are going to be building out, right? So I believe that AI will play a significant role to really help them fast track the learning and the management of the network that they have going forward. So we have just a couple more minutes left. I'd probably like to open it up to say, what are some last-minute recommendations that you'll see providing to the operators right now who are considering deploying Open RAN? Maybe a quick
Yeah, I mean, I think most of
update.
them have already moved. Those sitting on the sidelines, I would say, don't sit on the sidelines. I mean, this network transformation is inevitable. Open interfaces, disaggregation, bringing the cloud-native principles on the network. They're all the right things to do, which have a lot of potential and yield a lot of benefits to the network. So just get started from everything, from skill transformation to automation. There's a whole lot of things that you need to do as part of that journey, but most important thing is to take those first steps and get started.
Perfect. Thank you, Manish. Samir?
I couldn't agree more with Manish. The cost, fail fast is the one thing I would ask you all to do. It's not going to cost much. Go experiment in the cloud. Fail fast, innovate. And it's not like you're going to have to buy hundreds of thousands of servers to go try something. The cloud environments exist. Try it. If it works, fantastic. If it doesn't, let's try something else. So it's asymmetric in terms of your risk to reward. So fail fast.
Thank you. Geoff?
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I think as an industry, we have to industrialize the commercialization. I think where companies like yourself with Wipro can really benefit is by democratizing the knowledge required to do that, to make it as repeatable as possible. It's really hard. Changing this is really, really hard. Let's not underestimate that. It's not that people wake up in these very large operators and say, I just don't want to do it. It's because they're at 110% utility just keeping the lights on today. So we have to help and stand in their shoes and start very quickly with some kind of business case, use case outcome. Go, go, go.
Thank you. So I really would like to thank our panelists here for sharing some very insightful, thoughtful perspective on what needs to happen with ORAN. And I really would like to close by saying that it is the ecosystem that works together to create a successful ORAN deployment. Do reach out to the partners here. Let us continue to connect. And also remember, it starts with the equipment that you deploy, it starts with the software, it starts with the engineering, it starts with the consulting, and it's all of them together that actually enable you to be very, very successful with ORAN deployment. So thank you all again for joining me, and thank you for listening.
What if humanity's biggest questions, curiosities, achievements were inspired by one thing? The belief that tomorrow can be better than today. What's your ambition?